I'll be right back.
would engage your audience.
Okay. Well, Kelby, do you want to talk first?
Talk?
Do you want to talk first?
I'm happy to talk anytime. I'm just
Oh,
checking
yeah?
our level.
All right.
Gordon, we're probably not quite ready. Just making a couple level adjustments.
Yeah, I'd rather have a little bit of
That's okay.
pre-action happening. People will know that we're here.
Well, then, David, just hang tight. We won't address the audience until we're ready to go.
Okay.
We'll keep them in suspense. And so, David, what we imagined is, I'll do a little intro, hello. Gordon will do a little. Are you going to do this?
Yeah, no.
Okay. I'll do a little intro and hello.
You can tell people I'm here though, Kelby.
I will certainly. And then at some point, we'll find a spot and we'll take a break and if it's okay with you, I'll ask you some questions
Okay.
about
Sure.
New Orleans piano. all that
Traffic
kind of
warrants.
stuff. Traffic warrants, outstanding parking tickets in 6 states. That's lucky, you can have it.
Wanted in 3 provinces and not wanted in the others?
That kind of stuff. You're not really going to use that thing, are you?
I just knocked your mic down.
Yeah, I saw that.
Oh no, follow the money. We'll just play that initial form straight through, not all the variations on it that they.
Oh, you can do it, yeah, you can do what you like.
Yeah, that's just piano and drums on that record.
Oh, yeah, just show me the money, yeah. I just wanted that as they played it,
Okay.
but I mean, if you wanna just do your thing on it, I'll follow you.
I'm hearing it go 2/4. Is that what you heard?
Oh. That's what I heard.
Yeah.
David, I'd like to get you just a pinch closer to this microphone. Is that going to be any way if I
Yeah, yeah.
twist
But
it like
it
this?
was kind of, I was
Yeah,
realizing I'm going to need that. So,
Well, you know, we could just bump it up onto this step.
yeah. There you go.
And put something heavy on it. This one's not as you know, wide a representation as it could be. Yeah, if you kind of like around wherever you're gonna, is that where you might be comfortable singing?
Well, probably right here.
That's gonna be great.
Yeah.
That's gonna be great.
Bum 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 bum.
You say bum on the thing. We're
Yeah.
live, baby.
Is it? But is that going to
Can
tip?
you hold it for 1 second? I'm gonna
Yeah.
put something heavy on the end. David, as soon as you walked into the room, did you notice I got an accent? As soon as you walked into the room, I developed an accent.
Could it go here?
I don't see why not.
That would.
Would that be preferable?
Yeah.
I mean, I could drop this.
Yeah. That way.
Can you hold it up again for 1 second?
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're trying to do. Just gonna move it to the other side.
That way I can get the.
So, Gordon, you too. Thank you. Now you tell us what's gonna work for the shot, Gordon.
Well, well, well. Well, well, well. Well now. Boom, boom, boom.
If it's good there, I think it's gonna be good here.
Shoot you right down.
All right, you guys. I'm gonna wash my
Hello. Hello, lovely people. We'll be with you in a minute. We're just finishing a few technical setups here. We're glad you found us online. And before you know it, the music will be happening. So bear with us just 3 or 4 more minutes.
Shall we?
Yes, we're already on the air.
Hi, everybody.
Folks are watching.
All right. Shall I say my welcome now?
Yes.
Yes, but everything has to be said into a microphone.
Well, it's your,
You know what? Don't worry, I'll do this.
okay.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Tuesday Night Jazz at the Church. My name is Kelby MacNayr. It's my great pleasure to be here this evening. On our first evening of, I suppose, a provincial state of emergency. So we were hoping that we'd have all of you here with us in this beautiful space to share in this beautiful music. But we are very grateful that under the current circumstances, we hopefully are able to connect with some of you via live streaming. So first of all, we'd like to thank all of you for tuning in. And I'd like to thank these wonderful musicians. On the bass, the great Peter Dowse, ladies and gentlemen. And our very special guest this evening, the one and only David Vest, the best in the West. And we are coming to you tonight through the tireless hard work of one Gordon Miller, who you can't see, but he's back there amid an assortment of cables and devices, figuring this out for the first time. We are having a good time doing it, and I can think of no place I would rather be on such an evening than sharing in such beautiful music with these beautiful musicians. So we're going to dive right into the music. We're going to play a little set for you. Then somewhere in the middle, we're going to take a break, in which point I get to ask, because you don't necessarily get to ask, I'm going to ask David some questions. Some questions maybe, well, we'll get to that when we get there. But first, we're going to play a little set of music for you, take a little break, ask some questions, and play another set of music for you. So thank you so much for tuning in here at Tuesday Night Jazz at the Church. Welcome, and please enjoy the music.
Thanks, Kelby. I'd like to say hello to everyone, too. I wish you could all be here, but I'm glad we can be together like this, because right now we have to find ways, new ways to be together. And I think if we put our whole mind to it, we'll be able to do that. I'd like to start off this evening with a New Orleans classic done by Professor Longhair and many others, called She Walked Right In. It's 2 flats, 2/5, turn around. Well, she walked right in, she walked right out. She walked right in, you know, she walked right out. She walked right in, she walked right out. Singing, ooh, bop, chi bop, hiddly bop. Ooh, bop, chi bop, bop, hiddly bop. Ooh, bop, chi bop, bop, hiddly bop. Ooh, bop, chi bop, about the hill about. Well, she walked right in, boy, she walked right out. Dowse on the bass for you. Still, do the old rugged cross. New Orleans, a hymn that was written in 1913 that became very popular among New Orleans musicians. It was my grandmother's favorite song. so strong. You can keep me from all wrong, and I'll be satisfied alone. As I walk, let me walk close to thee. And when my feeble life is o'er, time for me will be no more. Guide me to that other shore where I can walk. Let me walk close to thee. And I'm singing just a close walk with thee. Granted, granted, if you please. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, oh Lord, let it be. Yeah, a little New Orleans style version of a couple of classic hymns, The Old Rugged Cross and Just a Closer Walk with Thee. Songs that you would hear the brass bands playing, and coming down the street, coming down the alleyway, coming through the neighborhood, because New Orleans music is more than anything else, it's neighborhood music. And that makes it nostalgia music for a time like this, because, you know, when the entire neighborhood can't be together in the way that it's used to being. You can't even find enough people to say smart alecky things to. Like the title of this next song, written by a wonderful New Orleans pianist named Michael Pellera, who recorded it with the great drummer Johnny Vidakovich. Show me the money. It says, show me the money. It goes something like this. show me the money. That's New Orleans. New Orleans talk for it's time to get paid. And of course, New Orleans has a patron saint for everything. Do you know the patron saint of musicians that want to hurry up and get paid so they can go home? That doesn't apply right now because we're having a good time, but sometimes at the end of the evening, it's like Mose Allison said, all night long he was hanging around. Now that I need him, he can't be found, doing the get paid waltz. The patron saint of New Orleans musicians that want to get paid so they can go home, Kelby. Saint Expedito. You light a candle to Saint Expedito. Well, we're gonna, I'm gonna get my lyrics up here where I can see what I'm doing, and do you a classic song that, the song originates in St. Louis. It's the story of a bad man named, various names, Stagger Lee, Stacker Lee, and the story has been told in many different ways, many different times, and usually whoever does the song adds a little bit of their own twist to it, so it you know, it got bigger and bigger, and the story gets longer and longer. It's kind of like the Odyssey or the Iliad. And probably 100 years from now or 300 years from now, they'll come up with the name of somebody and say that he wrote all this, like Homer or Virgil. Anyway, this is the little story of a Stacker Lee as it was done in New Orleans, first by the great pianist known as Archibald. Corner when I heard my fool dog bark. He was barking at the men who were gambling in the dark. That was Stagger Lee and Billy, these men who gamble late. Stagger Lee throwed 7, Billy swore that he throwed 8. Now Stagger Lee, he told Billy, I can't let you go with that. You done won my money, now you want my Stetson hat. Stagger Lee, he went running down that old lonesome railroad track. Said, I'm gonna kill you, Billy, if I catch you here when I come back. Stagger Lee, he went home and he knocked on his woman's door. He said, wake up, Luberta, better hand me that 44. Well, you know Luberta, she rose up out of bed, looked him smack in the eye, said, come on in here, honey, I can see some poor man fixing to die. Stagger Lee went to the barroom, stood on the barroom door, said, don't nobody move, then he flashed that 44. Now Stagger Lee, cried Billy, oh, please don't take my life. I got 3 little children and a very sickly wife. Stagger Lee told Billy, oh, honey, don't you lie to me. You ain't seen them children since 1953. Oh, yeah, yes, I know. You got a cute little boy and girl. If you want to see your family, Billy, have to see them in another world. Stagger Lee shot Billy. Lord, he shot that boy so fast. Bullet went through Billy Billy and then broke the bartender's glass. Like that. You know, Stagger Lee went around the corner and they shot him in his side. Stagger Lee went stumbling to his mother's door. He said, "Mother, oh dear mother, won't you roll me over slow? I've been jabbed in my side by a police 44. Now when the ladies in the parish heard that Stagger Lee was dead, some come dressed in orange and some come dressed in red. Now Stagger Lee, he went to the devil to identify poor Billy's soul, but the poor boy was absent, he had point down to charcoal. Now the devil heard her rumbling, mighty rumbling down under the ground. Said that must be Mr. Stag turning Billy upside down. And the police found the devil hiding on that devil shelf. Said if you want Stagger Lee, you're gonna have to go get him by yourself. So you were going to ask some questions.
Yeah. All right, let's do a little bit of a
All right.
Q&A.
Okay.
So when we talk of David about the New Orleans piano masters, could you tell me a little bit about when you first encountered someone who had that sound and maybe how that felt to you or what first got you about the New Orleans piano sound?
Well, I first encountered it through a kind of a side door. You know, we're playing here in this beautiful church tonight here in James Bay. I heard it from gospel piano players, especially a wonderful lady named Mildred Falls, who was one of the greatest gospel pianists who ever lived, and she worked with Miss Mahalia Jackson out of New Orleans, and she had that sound and that kind of feel for the stuff. I can't remember who the first actual New Orleans person was I ever met, because the time I thought I'm going to have to answer a question like this, I'd done met 100 of them.
So maybe you could tell me and the viewers at home, so what is it that makes a New Orleans piano player? What is it that makes a New Orleans piano different from a sound from Kansas City or from New York? What gives it what's a flavor or a
Well,
style?
it's a mixture of musical styles. The fact that it's a community sound, and it is a mixture of influences. There was a very large free black population in New Orleans. Many of them had come there from Alabama when they were run out of Mobile, which of course had the first Mardi Gras parades and celebrations. And the Creole people, these were highly educated folks. They had their conservatories and knew music inside and out, knew European music, knew the music of the Caribbean. So it's got gospel flavor in it. It's like a gumbo, really. You eat a gumbo, you're gonna have some crawfish in there, you're gonna have some sausage, you might have some chicken, might have a little fish. Might have a little something nobody knows what it is.
Secret sauce.
Yeah, and the secret sauce, and these, the New Orleans piano players weren't afraid to play these big churchy chords, like.
Ah, I see what you're saying. So there's a warmth, there's a robustness, there's a je ne sais quoi, maybe a little bit of a party going on in those sounds.
Yeah, and the idea that you might have to play this music anywhere. You might get hired in a house of ill repute. You might get hired to play at an all-night place down on Bourbon Street. You might be the piano player that comes on at 5 a.m. and plays till 8 in the morning. So you're going to play for the hangover people. You play for dances, and of course, boogie-woogie piano player gets started by piano players playing by themselves all night for dancers. And you got to keep the beat going. You got to do the bass part. You got to get the melody part, and you can't let your right hand know what your left hand's doing, or the scaffolding will collapse. You gotta sneak up on a piano. You gotta know how to sneak up on the piano, and that's the main thing I learned from New Orleans piano players: how to sneak up on a piano.
Interesting. You want to play us a little bit of boogie now, maybe?
Yeah, play a little bit of boogie woogie now. This is you know, New Orleans. We all listen to New Orleans music, but New Orleans musicians listen to everybody else too. And this is a little something that Dr. John would have probably learned from Kansas City piano players. This is a song known around the world. Even Oscar Peterson recorded this song 2 or 3 times at different tempos. It's called The Honey Dripper.
Thank you, David. Hey, I wonder if you could talk to us just briefly about a little bit of the evolution, or at least the timeline of New Orleans piano players. Can you tell me maybe, like, if you were to give us a snapshot of 100 years of New Orleans piano players, like who are some of the greats early on and in the middle, and some who are still playing today?
Well, one of the early on greats was a man known only by his nickname that the other piano players called him by. He was known as Old Drive 'Em Down. Champion Jack Dupree talks about hearing him as a young man playing in a saloon in New Orleans, or at a social gathering maybe, and he was just driving those keys down, you know. Of course, early in the 20th century, the great Jelly Roll Morton, and somebody that was close to him, that knew him well, and that he respected much, was Little Brother Montgomery. Little Brother Montgomery helped the Jelly Roll do things like the Alabama Jubilee. And Little Brother Montgomery, wrote the 44 blues. He called it first the Vicksburg blues, but that got picked up by a later generation of piano players, that it would include Big Maceo Merriweather and Roosevelt Sykes, and Memphis Slim learned the song through those guys. But in New Orleans, the piano playing of the jazz players it is not that well known from the 20s, 30s, on into the 40s. A New Orleans musician who was not a piano player, I want to mention, but because of the times we're living in and the state of emergency that's going on here, was somebody who went through something like this himself. And that was the great Lonnie Johnson. Lonnie Johnson invented blues guitar playing. He was the first musician that ever played a single note solo on a guitar. The first recorded blues guitar solo was played by him in the 1920s on a record by Louis Armstrong called the Savoy Blues. Well, Lonnie Johnson was born in New Orleans, and during the late 19-teens, he went out on tour looking for work and playing in different places. And this was the time of the great pandemic flu of 1918, 19, on into 1920. Often referred to as the Spanish flu, not because it came from Spain, but because the Spanish press was they were the only newspapers allowed to report the truth about it. Everybody else wanted to kind of play it down and not upset the war effort, World War I and all that. So it was called the Spanish flu because Spanish newspapers were where people got their information about it. Well, Lonnie Johnson came back home to find that his entire family, except for one brother, had been victims of this pandemic flu. So he experienced the loss of community, the loss of the whole family, and you can hear all that in the music that he wrote. The other great piano players, that he would have surely known and probably played with more than one time. I mentioned champion Jack Dupree. And then you come up into the 1950s and you get a piano player like Huey Smith, known as Huey Piano Smith. Huey Piano Smith put together a band called Huey Piano Smith and the Clowns. And they did things like I Got the Rockin' Pneumonia and the Boogie-Woogie Flu. And he also did a song that I recorded on my last CD I like to play here in the key of G. It's called Genevieve, and Huey Smith wrote this song. Can't you see, I've had enough, that's all for me. Well, can't you see, I've had enough, that's all for me. Genevieve, open up your heart and set me free. I know you know I was a fool for you. I know you know I was nothing but a little fool for you. But Genevieve, can't have your pie and eat it too. Coming back when I'm gone. Oh, I won't be coming back. Genevieve, you did me wrong, let's face the fact. Genevieve, ah, Genevieve. Ah, Genevieve, Genevieve, you know it really hurts to leave. one of many songs written by the great Huey Piano Smith, who was an influence on everybody. Along about this time, of course, the Titanic presence in New Orleans was Mr. Henry Rowland Bird, known as Professor Longhair. He was surprised to be called Professor Longhair when he'd always be known by the ladies as Little Lovin' Henry. But Little Lovin' Henry became Professor Longhair, and he made use of, some people call it scat singing, some people call it nonsense syllables. You heard a little bit of it in that first tune we did, ooh bop, she bop, bodily headly bop. And you certainly hear it in his classic tune, Tipatina. And I like the explanation that Pop Staples used to give for this kind of thing in music, for the wordless moaning that you hear in the spirituals and blues sometimes. It's because when you sing these things that don't really seem to mean anything, but they clearly do mean something, even the devil don't know what you're talking about. Try my Tina now. Tipatina, Tipatina. Try la 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 la. Hula mala gala mala, won't you find me mighty high? Where did you stay last night? You come home this morning, darling, and them clothes ain't fit you right. Tipatina, Tipatina, honey, what's getting wrong with you? You're 3 times 7, darling, and you know how you ought to do. Professor Longhair is a Tipatina. I mentioned Dr. John a little earlier. We recently lost Dr. John. His real name was Mac Rebenak, and I suppose most of his friends called him Mac. Except there was one musician that called him Mac Rubberneck. So that's what happens if you say a thing like that about a New Orleans musician. Just won't put up with it.
He's right here.
Yeah. I got this, boy. So Dr. John is passed on now, but of course he studied with he studied all these New Orleans greats, like James Booker and Alan Toussaint, and In terms of popularity and being known by the general public, towering over all these people was the figure of the man that Elvis Presley said was the real king of rock and roll. And that's Fats Domino. Fats Domino had, I don't know how many, top 10, top 20 hits. He had them for a long time. He sold he had a million-seller record in 1949. He was still having hits in the 60s when the Beatles came along. He has the distinction of being the best-known artist ever to smuggle cooking equipment into France. He liked New Orleans food, and he said he didn't like to go to Europe because there's nothing to eat over there. That doesn't quite match my experience of Europe. But he liked to cook New Orleans things like red beans and rice and get some crawfish going and, some pig's feet. And since he was a major rock and roll star, they put him up in these 5-star hotels. And, the rich other tenants of the hotels began to complain about the smells coming from the Fats Domino suite. And so they said, you can't stay here anymore unless you quit bringing all this cooking equipment with you. You'll have to eat from room service. And he tried to explain to them that they didn't have anything fit to eat on their room service menu. But they wouldn't listen, and so he had a false bottom trunk made. If you're going to inspect the trunk, you'd make him open it, you'd look in, there's all his stage clothes, and you poke through and it just goes on down deep into the trunk. But when you pull that out, there was a false bottom area down in the trunk where all his pressure cooker and his skillets and the utensils he liked to use from home were. And so they never could figure out how that room was still smelling like pig's feet. More importantly, he was the only American artist in any genre of music. This would include classical music, jazz music, blues music, dance music, pop music, country music. The only artist in any of these fields that refused to perform for segregated audiences. He just wouldn't play. He'd go home. And when asked about it, he didn't have a big speech to make. He just said music's supposed to bring people together. And I hope we're doing a little bit of that tonight with this new experiment of playing for people we can't see. So, I don't know if you buttoned your shirt up wrong, but mine's right. So I checked it twice in the mirror. I knew I was going to be on the camera. Well, let's play something by Dr. John. A little medley of stuff by him, which draws in influences from 19th century New Orleans music, composers like Louis Gottschalk. Well, well, well. Some people think they jive me, you know they must be crazy. Don't see their misfortune, I guess they're just too lazy. Je suis the grand zombie. Well, let's return to New Orleans just a little bit and back to the legacy of Professor Longhair and look at Hey Now, Baby. Head now, honey child. Head now, baby. Head now, honey child. Head now, baby. Sure do wish you were mine. Yeah, went all over town, telling everybody that I was nothing but your clown. You did. Well, you did. Now you did, pretty baby, and they told me everything you did. What you gonna do? Oh, baby, what you gonna do? I'm getting sick and tired fooling around with you. Well, I get up in the morning, fix you something to eat, Before I go to work, I even brush your teeth. I come back in the evening, you're still in bed. Got a rag tied round your head, oh baby. So what you gonna do? I'm sick and tired fooling around with you. Telling you to change your ways. I'm telling you, honey, I mean what I say. Last time telling you, right now, you're gonna find yourself outside, oh baby. But what you gonna do? I'm getting sick and tired fooling around with you. Well, as the great Mississippi writer Eudora Welty once said, the time getting all gone here. We don't want to keep you occupied and make you miss your story on the other channel. I'd like to thank Brother Kelby MacNayr for inviting me to this, playing brilliant drums, and Peter Dowse on the bass. I'd like to thank Gordon for setting all this equipment up. I wish you could see it. You think no wonder they went to the moon. We're going to go out of here now just by showing you some of the links between the New Orleans music and the more modern jazz, such as played by Thelonious Monk. Thank you for tuning in. And you guys will be back next Tuesday with another broadcast, I understand. Who's your guest next week? We know yet?
Well, it's a funny thing you should ask that. Next week, we were planning to welcome the great Kansas City saxophonist Dan Thomas here, but due to travel restrictions, the lovely and talented saxophonist Roy Stife will take his place.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll be here with Roy Stife, a bassist Scott White, pianist Brent Jarvis, and myself on drums, and we'll do a little bit of a retrospective of some of the great influences on Roy's playing, checking out some Paul Desmond, a little bit of Cannonball Adderley, and Charlie Parker. So that's next Tuesday here at 7 o'clock at Tuesday Night Jazz at the Church. And before we go, David, there was a couple questions that I know that our listeners would love to know before we sign off here. Could you tell us just three things? One, what was the thing that first inspired you to play the piano? And second of all, did you have music in your family? And third, where are you going from here, musically speaking?
Oh. Well, it's hard to answer the first one because I have no memory of not ever playing the piano. As far back as I can remember, I was playing the piano, at least fooling around at it. I did have music in my family. My grandmother was a singer in our local church. And she was the kind of singer that was great enough to make people, change denominations just so they could go hear her every Sunday. And she bought me the first piano I ever owned when I was about 10 years old, and an old upright. And my dad had no music in him, and he didn't like any of the music that any of the rest of us liked. He wanted us to all get out of the car so he could play Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys. But he did haul that old upright around for me when I first started playing for gigs. He put it on a pickup truck and take it to the show and then bring it back home. And so my mother made sure that I heard all kinds of music. She took me to see the great gospel pianists. She took me to my first rock and roll show, which was Carl Perkins in about 1958. And I'm still looking for a band that rocked harder than that one did. Haven't found them yet. And she, she would say, she would like bring home an LP and say, it's time you got into jazz, check out this. And I remember she gave me an album by the British band leader, Red Joan, who scored a top 20 hit with his song Manhattan Spiritual. So I listened to this big band jazz, and then, she said, you need to check out these pop players like Roger Williams and guys that were playing Autumn Leaves and Canadian Sunset and those things. And by the time I got in college, I had heard a lot of different piano players, and the ones I was listening to most as a young person was John Lewis of the Modern Jazz Quartet. My style of playing is nothing like him, but he's the guy that I want to hear when I'm lying on the sofa in the afternoon, looking at the sunset or something. I want to hear John Lewis play the piano, and the other was Brubeck. And, the Modern Jazz Quartet and the Dave Brubeck Quartet were the big things for me. I also liked, I was a teenager, at a time when rock and roll was dominated by piano players. It wasn't always the guitar player out in front. It was, Jerry Lee Lewis at a piano out in front of the band, or Little Richard and the Upsetters, or Fats Domino, of course, or Huey Piano Smith. So they sort of drew me into playing this rock and roll stuff.